In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can begin to recomposite the different render elements that we output in our previous lesson. Alright, so by this point now you should have these different render elements that have been rendered out. So if you take a look inside the render output of your current 3ds Max directory, you should have these different renders that have been output. So you can see here's the name that I gave it during renders, and it's now inherited as part of the last part of this file, the actual name that we defined when we were naming these individual render elements. So here's the caustics, direct light, matte, and so on and so forth. So now let's take these, and I'm going to use Photoshop in my case to recomposite these back together. We don't necessarily need to use Photoshop, but you can really just use any kind of a compositing application that you want. The steps and procedures should be pretty much the same. So just for comparison's sake, we have also just the already composited render that was already output, or that was output during our rendering process. So here's what we want to try to achieve, alright? So let's start with really any of these elements that we want. Maybe something like this direct light pass. I can take this, Control A to copy, and Control C, or rather Control A to select everything, and Control C to copy. We'll take this, and let's put this over something like this diffuse pass. Now this diffuse pass, again, it's just looking at flat color information. We'll paste this over, and maybe use something like a multiply to actually kind of composite these back together. So now we get the lighting and shading information from both. So here's the light combined with the direct illumination. Alright, so at this point now we don't need that. I'm just going to close these as I use them. Now if we want, we can go ahead and use this mask as well. Again, this is our isolation matte of these three models. This sort of a thing can come in handy, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it into the alpha channel, because we might need to use this here in a little bit. So I'll just close that. Let's find our other elements here. Let's maybe start with something like these bubbles. Right, so this is our refraction pass. You can see here they are. Now we need to come in, Control A to select it all, Control C to copy, Control V to paste that back in. Now with this one, again, you'll notice that these different render passes, some of these don't contain an alpha channel. So in this case, that's why it's important to use something like this isolation matte. So we can just Control click on this alpha, go back, and then we use that as the actual mask here. And once we're done, we can just throw that away. There we are. Excellent. So that's now been composited back over. Close that when I'm done. And let's see what else we have. We have the caustics, which were separated into their own pass by using that diffuse checkbox down back in the render elements. Control A to copy, or Control A to select it all, Control V to copy. Now for this we can use something like a linear dodge or an add mode. That should remove all the black and just leave us with these caustics. They're a little bit bright, but that's okay. Once we get the shadows in here, this will start to kind of darken up a bit. And we have the reflection elements, just like before. Copy that. We'll paste it over the refraction passes, rather. And again, select this, maybe like a linear dodge, kind of additive mode. There we go. Here's our specular. Do the same for it. Paste it up at the top. Give it an additive mode. So you can start to see how we're rebuilding our original render with some of these just individual elements. So specular, we have the reflection that's kind of composited back on here. Really starting to bring this back together now. And let's come in. Let's take the alpha from this shadow pass. Control A to copy that. Paste this back in here, or anywhere where you can use it. I just wanted to make sure that I paste it back in here. Now I can Control click. And that way that'll select all this kind of lighter colored area. And let's try to paste this somewhere between kind of these caustics. Oops. Let's make sure that I do have the right color selected here. There we go. So that way we paste this back in with a nice black shadow. So I want to try to get these shadows underneath the actual bottles and things like that. All right, always kind of helps to come back and rename some of this, if you can. So bottles. And this is the reflection. And this was the specular. All right, very nice. All right, so now we pretty much recomposited this image back together. Okay, so now we're pretty much back to where we were, right? So you're probably wondering, all right, that was really a lot of wasted time just to get back to where we were. But the beauty of this now is the fact that we do have all of these elements separated out. So if at any time we were to come back and say, well, maybe these caustics are a little bit too bright, we don't have to go back and mess with our renders to actually start to alter things in mental ray, things like that. We can just come back and start to adjust the opacity of this caustic layer. So dial this up or down however we need, or maybe if we decide we need more caustics, just take this layer and duplicate it. And just like that, we now get brighter caustic type effects. So we could also come in and let's say maybe we wanted to make some adjustments to the colors of these bottles. Now if we were to come in and maybe assign a new adjustment layer for hue and saturation and use that on the previous layer, so that way you can just kind of clip this together. And if we were to come in, make some alterations to the colors of these bottles, let's say something a little bit different, and maybe start to adjust, the colors any way that we choose. And once we have this in place, all right, everything looks good. And we can just always take this if we now need to get the caustics to match up to the color of the bottles. We should be able to just take this, duplicate that hue and saturation layer, and just now clip that to the caustics as well. So that way all the color changes that we made to the bottles are now reflected here as well. All right, so really quickly you start to see some of the possibilities that you get with having all of these different elements separated. It gives you a great amount of freedom to then come back and make these changes however you deem necessary without ever having to step foot back in Max to re-render something.